I'm Algenon Cash, and you're locked in. We are wrapping up March, which is Women's History Month. And so here on the Locked In Show, I've been very intentional about pulling together conversations with women within our community and across our state that is doing impressive work. We kicked off this month with a conversation with Virginia Summy, who is a professor and historian and teacher at Salem College. You can find that conversation on our YouTube channel or, of course, the podcast. And then we also had a great conversation with Donna King, who is the editor in chief of the statewide publication Carolina Journal, which I also write for. We had a great conversation about journalism. And then last week we had a woman entrepreneur, Cecily Jordan, came in and talked about how to balance community and family and business, especially for some of the women out there that are working within business. So we've had some great conversations this month. All those are available on our YouTube channel. Just search Algenon Cash, or hopefully you are a subscriber to the podcast. And whether you get that on Apple or Spotify, wherever your favorite podcasts are, those conversations are available. And so I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce a new friend to the Locked In community. Iris Cole is a board member with Project Space 411. And recently, about a month or so ago, I was invited to a community event they did in downtown Winston-Salem in the former canteen space on 4th Street. Had an opportunity to learn about some of the work that Iris is doing in our community and just wanted to bring this conversation to my audience. Iris, thank you for locking in with me. How are you today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
I was sharing with you offline, not only is my audience getting an opportunity to learn more about you and Project Space 411, but I'm also going to be learning at the same time as my audience because I don't know much about Project Space 411, but I was very impressed by the presentation and the community event that you all recently hosted at the space. And so just wanted my audience to learn more about it. I guess let's just start there. We'll start at ground zero. Just help me and my audience understand a lot more about what Project Space 411 is and some of the great work they are doing here in our community.
Happy to. So Project Space 411 is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2019. And its focus really from inception was about how do we leverage the creative assets of this community. I moved to Winston-Salem probably 9 years ago now, had lived abroad for 12 years. And what I found was that Winston-Salem had more arts per capita than probably any place that I'd ever lived. And, and then how do we really leverage all of those creative assets towards our greatest goals and aspirations for Winston-Salem? We are the city of arts and innovation, and we have a plethora of assets. And whether they are currently being used for arts or for economic development doesn't matter. It's how are we connecting the dots and bringing those to bear in a different way. So that had a lot to do with the origin story of Project Space 411. It was not a physical space, but rather a philosophical space
Hmm.
to start out with. And then in 2022, this is of course post pandemic. Um, we were doing some strategic planning, and an opportunity came about to assume doing work in this space downtown, which is on the corner of Fourth and Spruce um, streets. And what would it look like to activate a space, an asset in the community? Um, and so that sort of began converting Project Space from a philosophical one to a physical one. And so there, we started to pull the community together in different ways in the space to understand what that space could look like, what would bring value. And what we found is that that space, um, in its particular location, in proximity to all of the arts that are connected down the street, Milton Road Center for the Arts, all of the entrepreneurial activity that is happening in 500 West Fifth, right up the other, sort of north of the location. And then, of course, its proximity to the Stevens Center just made this an ideal location for creativity to occur and for community to come together and for these assets to be looked at in a different way. And so the vision for Project Space was born. And again, we've been convening the community in the space to talk about a number of different things. It is being used currently for events. And so the community can reach out to use the space. And so we've done, anything from uh, having sort of satellite art gallery exhibitions in the space to community convenings to fundraising events, et cetera. But really, the long term, bigger vision for that space is a film studio,
Hmm.
a cutting edge film studio in the front of the space, um, and with the idea that that studio would have very specialized infrastructure, but the ability to really amplify and democratize storytelling. There are so many stories that are important to tell. Here, we have Winston-Salem stories to tell. We have North Carolina stories to tell. We have national stories to tell. And what we know to be true is that in this community, there's so much talent. Not only are there stories, but there's so much talent. We have filmmakers and people behind the scenes and actors and I mean just this plethora of talent that could be connected to storytelling in our community. So the space and the studio are slated to have unique infrastructure that would provide the opportunity for food programming, and food is critical to our coming together as people. It is really important in the storytelling of our cultures, and and we also believe that education in the realm of food and food insecurity is another thing that we might be able to tackle through a studio with that type of infrastructure. So, while that infrastructure isn't permanent, it can be pulled out. The studio is slated to have any range of pre and post production as well as live production capability and cutting edge technology that would allow for, not a full motion screen picture in the space that large, certainly, but the capacity to do a lot of other
Yeah.
different programming.
As I listen to you, I've been connected to our arts community for many, many years and used to serve on the board of the Winston-Salem Symphony, and I've served on the Piedmont Wind Symphony board. Certainly have had a lot of interactions with our friends at the Downtown Arts Council, and even when we had Festival Stage in town, big supporter and sponsor of them as well. And as I listen to you describe the space and sort of the mission of what you all hope to achieve, I mean, now, correct me if I'm wrong and educate me. I mean, it sounds a little bit overlapping with some of the existing programs that are in the community. I guess for my audience and myself, help me understand, like, when you talk about the importance of storytelling and the importance of our arts community as you're describing it, what's that actual tangible outcome that you all are hoping to create through this project?
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that there are a lot of assets, right? Um, but we have a lot of infrastructure, certainly in our community. We have film studios at School of the Arts. We have a social documentary program at Wake Forest University. We have a media communications program at Winston-Salem State University. But infrastructure that the community has accessible is not as it's not there. on a day-to-day basis. And so, even students who do have access, for instance, need more access, and they need opportunities to get their ideas out there. So this is, an extension, really, I think, of the existing infrastructure that we have, and a place that is more accessible to the general public. But the idea too is to be able to recruit and do, to do films and generate content on a more consistent basis. The other really important thing I think about the studio, which I haven't mentioned, is that the model that we're looking at is really sort of a social enterprise model, where the is some commercial use of the space would really fund it at a scale that is more accessible to the general public. And I think that's a really big piece of what's important about this project. And we are a nonprofit, so again, I think those are some of the things that make it different.
No, I like that last piece of it, the whole social enterprise aspect of it, because as I'm traveling across the city and having conversations with so many nonprofits, and back in February we actually had Chuck Spong from Love Out Loud was here on the show, and we talked about some of the needs of so many of our nonprofits and charities across the community. And everybody just seems to be fighting for the same dollar, and we're just in an interesting time period within our economy. Certainly, we are in an interesting era when it comes to Washington, D.C. and grant funding and the types of monies that will be coming back to our state. And then I also think locally, Winston-Salem is just challenged in the sense that we've lost pretty much every publicly traded company with the exception of Hanes brand. And so when you lose those types of companies from your local economy, it really starts to severely harm your nonprofits and your community-based organizations, because there's just not enough money, going around. And so I do think a lot of nonprofits really need to be looking strong at being a social enterprise. Like, how do you actually generate something of value that you can actually start making money on to be able to fund all the outreach and the great work that you're doing here in our community? The night that I was able to join you all, I'm gonna give a big shout out right now to Ned Erickson, who's one of the partners at Lot 63. Big fan of his, but he was the one that told me a little bit about what you all were working on. And what really drew me in was the culinary arts aspect of it. And a lot of people in my audience know how much of a fan I am of our local food and beverage community. I helped create Eat, Drink, Triad 5 years ago, and we've been able to do some impressive work to highlight and promote our food and beverage community. And when I was at your event that night, I cannot recall the gentleman's name, but he spoke very passionately about this culinary arts project that you all are working on, and even talked about you all could end up being a model here in North Carolina for something along these lines. So that's what really got me excited. Tell my audience more about the culinary arts piece of it. I thought that was very intriguing.
Yeah, there's a couple of pieces to that story. So I think you're talking about Jake Camp, and Jake is an Emmy award winning producer of shows like Barefoot Contessa, um, and and there's a whole world out there of food storytelling that I think a lot of us um, take part in on a day-to-day basis. But this film studio is slated to have this kitchen to be able to do culinary sort of food storytelling. In addition, we're hoping that it will have space for food education.
Mm.
And so as we think about the health of our community, I think that the ability to have that aspect is really, really important. In our community, 1 in 4 children are food insecure. And that's just a statistic that we need to get our hands around. And we are absolutely um, we have a problem like in our world. There's obesity. There's social determinants of health. There's just there's all of these aspects of health that can be addressed through education. And we are moving into a world where we digest content online. You know, we just do. I mean, we have moved into that space. But I think what's beautiful about Project Space 411 is that it brings people together in person, and it brings people together to tell stories that can be pushed out to the world. And so it's just, I think it's really special for that reason.
No, I was really I was impressed with his presentation and commentary, and it really got me excited as well. My audience knows I really do believe food connects people, brings people together that oftentimes don't look the same, whether you're white, black, whatever background you have, short, tall, big, skinny, whatever your status is. Everybody seems to connect over food, and that is where you learn and get to know people by either having a cup of coffee and a Danish or, meeting for lunch or breakfast or whatever the case may be. And so no, I really thought that was pretty interesting. You also had a very dynamic young lady there speaking that night that talked about a community garden project that she put together on the south side of town. Tell my audience a little bit more about how that fits into what Project Space 411 wants to do as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great example. I think you're referring to Laura Cursivardea, who is a young leader in our community. And she is the founder of Southside Food Forest, and the permaculture collective here in Winston-Salem. And she is an amazing artist in her own right, and a sustainability graduate of Wake Forest University. She does a lot of work globally around the UN sustainability goals, and she's doing it in a small scale, in an area, south of downtown, where she's really regenerating a small plot of land there and using it to bring community together. So there's a lot of alignment in values, I think, between what she's doing and the space. And she has been able to leverage the space to bring people together around those issues of sustainability, in particular, and food and culture. And so I think it's just a great example of how artists, how community members, no matter what their interests are, can really leverage project space as a place to bring people together around ideas, to build relationships, and to tell their stories and get them out there, so that they can further connect with people for impact.
Yeah, I think that's the access part of it that you talked about. And I think that's pretty interesting to create almost like a town square where those kind of stories can get out. I feel like obviously Facebook and Instagram and all the social media platforms have become the virtual town square. And I don't know how helpful that is some days because it feels like if you go on those platforms, we're all just yelling at each other. We're all standing in the town square just yelling at one another. But I love the idea around trying to bring people together in a physical space, which is something I feel like we've lost since COVID. And I do feel like, even through Eat, Drink, Triad, we do a lot of engaging events for foodies and content creators. And when people come together in the same space and they share a meal together and share a conversation, there's a certain level of energy and excitement and flow that comes out of that. And I totally agree. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand to come from behind the small screens and actually start to interact and engage with one another again. So I appreciate the work you all are doing there. Iris, I've got a few more minutes with you. I also wanted to ask a question. I saw recently, and I actually saw this on Facebook. It was a post from an architect that I follow pretty closely. But I think there's been some plans submitted that maybe the Stevens Center or UNCSA is also going to be involved in taking over this space. Are they partnering with Project Space 411, or how does that collaboration, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we're a tenant of the space, just like other folks that are in the building. And so they definitely have an interest in that space, as you've seen. Um, and again, what's so exciting, I think, is that The Stevens Center is such a pivotal and critical asset to the community. It's going to come back online, just as so many things downtown are coming back online. And, everything that is happening in downtown to the vein of development is creating vibrancy. It's creating vibrancy downtown, which is so necessary for economic development. And so, anything from something that is small happening, for instance, in our space or down at Milton Roads or, again, like I mentioned, 500 West Fifth Street or down in Innovation Quarter, like all of that is leading to vibrancy and economic development. And that is really, really critical for our community and our community's growth and our community's future. So I'm super excited about the possibilities of what it can be, and we'll see. We'll see in the future.
Well, in these last few minutes that I have you, Iris, we jumped in pretty deep and talked a lot about Project Space 411, and I can tell from our conversation that you're very passionate about the work that's occurring there. So I appreciate your service on the board and the vision that you have for our community and the work that you're doing in the community. Well, let's use these last few minutes to talk about Iris specifically. So maybe share a little bit more about your background. What brought you to Project Space 411 and this passion that you have for downtown Winston-Salem?
I my background actually started in the arts. And so I have always been extremely passionate about the arts and the arts impact. But I've spent the last 20 years of my career in sort of sustainability, corporate social responsibility, and communications. And I felt really a calling later in life to see those things merge. And I know that there's power in that. And so I've spent a lot, I'm a social entrepreneur, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about managing and developing projects and products that connect the arts with impact. And so that's really a big driver in my life, and why I get involved with the things that I do. I just think, you know, sometimes art is what brings beauty to the world when it's turbulent, and it brings light to um, and possibility. It brings light and possibility and beauty, and so I think we as a community that has so much richness in the arts of all different types, we have a responsibility to really leverage that and put it out there. I think we saw sort of a different view of that during the pandemic, where all of a sudden the arts came into play in a completely different way. Um, and I think the idea of storytelling, no matter how you do that, whether it's in a written piece, whether it's in through music, whether it's acting, um, it's a means to express ourselves and to come into closer proximity with one another, and that's what is really, really important. So that's a driver for me.
I really agree with a lot of what you said. I definitely want to come back to something you just said a moment ago about the richness in the arts community within our city, and then also just the rich history that we have. And I'd love to get your reaction to this. I sometimes wonder if we are properly leveraging these assets, or if there's a lot of value that we're not taking advantage of, because just recently I had some conversations with some people around Old Salem, and how they're struggling right now in terms of being able to earn revenue and get people into the park and so forth. And even when you look at the School of the Arts, which I think the School of the Arts is like one of the crown jewels of Winston-Salem. I mean, I've had lots of opportunity to interact with their students and their faculty, and you think about the people that come from all around the world to descend on this little town called Winston-Salem because they want an opportunity at the School of the Arts. And then you look at how these people go off and really do some really interesting and special things. Like I actually heard a New York Times story recently that featured Denzel Washington, and he was talking about the School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which I was like, oh wow. And but with everything I just said, I mean, are we doing a good enough job of retaining some of those minds and those bright students and those talented people that come through the School of the Arts? Are we really leveraging our assets in this community the right way?
I always think that there is opportunity. Certainly, I hear that a lot. How are we, retaining our students here from? We have six universities and 27,000 students at any given time in our community. Um, and, it's interesting because I think in the arts, you have the ability to retain a certain amount locally. And at the same time, you would say it's an amazing opportunity to go out and fly and see the world and perform across the world and gain that experience, but feel a calling to come back or give back in any way that is benefiting the next generation. And so, there's both aspects of that that are really, really important. Um, any show you watch, any Broadway show you see, it's amazing to me. You might find an alumni that comes from Winston-Salem. And so it's exciting. And if you start to look, you can't unsee it. And so it's a mindset and a philosophy. And yeah, I mean, the talent that comes out of here, I think, School of the Arts has some of the top programs in the country. And so, yeah, we have amazing talent that's here and that you get to see if you want to access it pretty much every week of the year. And I mean, there is so much going on in this community. You have to choose. You really do have to choose. And there's a lot of ways to access that all of the performances that are here. I mean, another thing that I'd elevate to just an extraordinary arts asset is the Black Theater Festival. I
Mm.
mean, it is, it's an example of national prominence descending upon Winston-Salem for every other year, and the economic development that creates is also extraordinary. I don't have the stats on me, but I mean it generates millions of dollars in economic development for our community, and national prominence, and exposure. And so, we have to look at all of our assets, and we have to always, I think, constantly strive to put light on those, and make them known. There's so many people that are even 30 minutes from here that don't know about us. But then there's this national exposure that does. And so again, I think it's just a constant journey, constant retelling of our story that's going to generate that continued energy and excitement and engagement.
I think you're spot on. I don't keep up with all the Hollywood award shows and the Emmys and all the things that Oscars that I'm sure you watch and get excited about. But I did hear that there was a gentleman who won Best Costume Design for Wicked, I believe, and he went to School of the Arts. And I just had this vision in my mind of the same person who just won this big national award was the same person probably working on the costume design for the Nutcracker, right here in Winston-Salem. So yeah, I do think we have so many more opportunities to collaborate with the School of the Arts and just bring them more and more into the community. And you mentioned the Black Theater Festival. I used to be a bartender at the Cherry Street Bar inside of Adams Mark Hotel. And Dr. Hamlin, Larry Leon Hamlin, who created the Black Theater Festival, I was a kid then, and he would come in. He was actually just now working on creating his vision around the Black Theater Festival, and I got to witness a lot of that. as a young person, and will always have a lot of respect for not only his vision, but the way that event has grown over the years. And you're right, I don't know the exact dollars, but they make a huge impact every couple of years here in Winston-Salem. Last thing before I let you go, Iris, it's getting warm outside. The spring is here. My audience, they're looking for things to do this spring and summer. Tell them some places they can go this spring and summer and be able to support the arts community here in Winston-Salem.
Oh my goodness.
I know you've got a
There
dozen. Just give them a
just
couple. Don't overwhelm them.
yeah, no, gosh, there's so many different things. I'm gonna go broad because I think the arts are broad. Winston-Salem Fashion Week is gonna be celebrating a huge anniversary in September. I think River Run Film Festival is coming up in April. Oh my goodness. I mean, there's performances every week at School of the Arts and um, little theater, I mean, there's so many. The Piedmont Opera is doing I think Man of La Mancha right now. Um, yeah, I mean, the Arts Council hosts a website where you can sort of tap into everything that's going on. So I want to give a shout out to the Arts Council. And they do a great job of that, of Into the Arts. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's Delta Fine Arts Center is doing amazing things. There's a fantastic exhibition over at Sika and Ronaldo going on
So,
right
so
now.
much. Yeah.
Yeah.
So much
Um,
going on around town.
so
But I want to, and I definitely want to second your recommendation to check out River Run. I think that is an incredible event that happens every year right here in our backyard. It's our own film festival. I've seen some great performances at River Run over the years, and I strongly encourage my audience go check out River Run's website and see some of the great films that they will be showing here soon in April. And also, while you're on the internet, go check out Project Space 411 and learn more about the great work they are doing here in downtown Winston-Salem. I'm so grateful to have my new friend Iris Cole lock in with us. Thank you for joining us and giving us some education and background, not only on the work you all are doing, but also just generally about our arts community. And I also want to thank my audience for locking in as well. Make sure you stay tuned to WTOB because every Sunday morning, that's where you can lock in with me. But if you happen to miss me there, hopefully you are subscribed to the podcast. You can always get that on Apple and Spotify, wherever you like to get your favorite podcasts. You can always lock in there. And until next time, as always, stay locked in.